Hi guys, this is Mark. In this video, we'll talk about Relation Retrieval API, or specifically two-steps relation retrieval. Consider the following scenario. With the data that you already have, if you followed a previous lecture, you installed a sample database where we have cities and countries. And for a single country, we have a one-to-many collection for the cities. So suppose that you retrieve countries into your client application, and then when the user selects a country, you want to retrieve related cities and display them in the client application. So in this case, when you have the primary object or the parent object, and it doesn't have to be the parent object, because it could actually be the child object, because as you know, relations are bidirectional. So when you have one side of the relation, specifically, it is in the one-to-many relation, the side where you have one object already in the client application and you need to retrieve the related data, then this becomes the two-step relation retrieval. So the first step indicates that you retrieve the primary parent object, and the second step is retrieving related objects. So this is the API. I will demonstrate how it works in console. Actually, I cannot demonstrate it how it works in console, because in console we don't have two-step relation retrieval API. But we'll actually use console, and I'll demonstrate a few ways that you can achieve exactly the same functionality with REST console, just to see how the REST API works. But we will start with a UI demonstration and the API that will be in Codeless. That API is available in all of our SDKs. In fact, if you look in the Backendless API documentation and open up the two-step relation retrieval, that's the API that I will be talking about in this video. So now let's switch to Backendless Console, and we will navigate to UI Builder. And in here, you will need to create a new page from the marketplace. There is a page template that demonstrates the behavior that of the two-step relation retrieval. So for this, move the mouse over in this area, click New Page. You will need to select Marketplace in the Create From. Let's type in Relation Retrieval for the page name, and you will need to select this template. It's lecture 36, two-step relation retrieval. Click Create. This will create the page from the template, and in here the page assumes that you already have the data. So if you have not installed the database, the page will not work because the data is not there. And to do this, just go back to lecture 35. There is a link in the description to a zip file that you will need to download and import into Backendless. Now, I already have that data. In fact, let me demonstrate what the data looks like in the database. In here, there is a table called City that has about 42,000 records, and these are just various cities around the world. And as far as the data, we have information whether any given city is a capital. There is a name of the city, and there is population. There is also location, but I'm leaving anything related to locations to a separate part of this course where we'll be talking about locations. So let's ignore that for now. So at this point, we will be using name, population, and whether the city is the capital or not. And the second table is the country. And here you will see that there is a one-to-many relation to the city, where for all the countries that we have here, there are related cities in the city table. Something that is done a little bit differently with this country table is the actual country name I use as the object ID. And because why not? The data is being imported from the CSV that is included in the zip file that you downloaded, and it uniquely identifies the country, so we could easily use it as the object ID. But it could have easily be done through a separate column, such as the name, and then the object ID would be something else. But I decided to use object ID as the actual country name. So now that you're familiar with the structure of the database, let's go back to UI Builder, and we will run this page that I just created to see how that two-step relation retrieval works. So run the page, and you will see that this table, I'm using the data table component from UI Builder, it retrieves data from the country table. And then what happens is when I select a record here, then all the cities from the selected country are being loaded dynamically using the two-step Relation Retrieval API, and then the data is being rendered right here in this table. There is a little icon here that displays whether a city is the capital or not. You may not see it here right away. By the way, for Austria, we see that it is Vienna. But for others, it may not show up simply because it would be in a separate set, because here, as you will learn, the two-step relation retrieval, again, just like with data, uses the paged approach. But now that you are familiar with what the user interface looks like, let's take a look at the implementation logic for that page and get to the actual API of retrieving related objects. So the UI consists of primarily two parts. This is the data table. As you can see, it is configured, the data table component, UI component. As you can see, it is configured to work with a country table. So right here, simply by selecting the table, the UI component knows that it needs to go out and grab the data and display it right here. And then the paging is built into that component. Now, if we step into the logic for this UI component, then you will see that in the onRecordSelected event, this is the API that we're using. So this block right here, load object relations, is the actual API that lets us retrieve data from the related table. The actual block that you see right here is available in Codeless toolbar, run under Data API. If you scroll down to right around here, load object relations. So it's about midway in this section. So let's take a look at the parameters that are available here. Number one, you need to specify the name of the table. Notice that the name of the table is not city. While we are loading cities, we say table country. Here's the parent object, and we specify parent object ID. As you can see, the connector says parent object ID, and we say the relation name is cities. So for anything that that column points to, give us, in this case, 100 objects. And that's what happens. So this block returns a collection of related cities for this specific object. And then this block returns a collection. We set it as the repeater, and then the UI just starts rendering all this data. If you are using one of our SDKs and programming with code, you will see exactly the same behavior with the same parameters, where you specify parent object ID, the table where that object lives, and the name of the relation, and then the related objects are being loaded back. Just like with regular data access, whenever you retrieve data from a table, you can get up to 100 objects at a time. And I believe it was lecture, if I'm not mistaken, 24 or 14. You just search for paging in this playlist, in this course, and there's a lecture where we talk about paging and the significance of the page size and page offset. So it's going to be exactly the same approach to retrieve related data. If you would need to implement paging to get all those objects. If you want to get them all at once, or implement a mechanism that uses pagination. But the actual approach is going to be identical, and you already know about it, because if you follow this course, then you know how to use paging. If not, then just go back to the paging lecture, and in great detail it is described how that approach works. But here the behavior, as you can see, is pretty straightforward. We retrieve data and just render it in the UI. So that's the two-step relation retrieval. Now here's an interesting thing that as Backendless was developing, right? We introduced that API, but later on the other retrieval mechanisms have matured, and there is actually a way to retrieve related data using the standard approach of just going to cities and using where clause to retrieve exactly the same data. I will demonstrate how that works in REST console, and you will see that it's actually very straightforward. Now, for this, what I will do is I will bring your attention to this pseudo column, which is country and then cities in square brackets. We talked about it in great detail in the previous lecture. And this is a pseudo column indicating that there is a relationship coming from the country table into the city table. So what we can do is actually use this pseudo column to, in a where clause, to retrieve cities that belong to a specific country. And this is how it would work. So in our where clause, we will say country, and then put the relation column in the square brackets. And then object ID will be the actual country name. So here, if we say United States, and then click get, then we are getting countries. Then we're getting cities for the specified country, which is exactly the same effect. It's exactly the same result that I just demonstrated, but slightly different approach. So I'm using the data, just the standard data retrieval API with a where clause, and I'm getting exactly the same set. So with paging, if I say that I want 100 records, click get, now I got 100 cities, and then I can just use paging to get more data. Now this approach is actually more flexible than the one that I demonstrated, because if you remember the block that loads relations, it doesn't have where clause. So it will just start returning all data that belongs to a specific country, like all cities. But let's say if we want to start narrowing down those cities, like for instance, we can say, give us all the cities that belong to United States in this case, and where population is greater than, for instance, 1 million, right? This is 1 million. Now click get. So now we got all the cities where the population is greater than 1 million. And that is quite convenient because sometimes you may want to narrow down the results of bringing related data back into the application. And in those cases, this is the approach that you should be using, rather than the block that I demonstrated. So in this case, it would be just a standard block to retrieve data from the backend using a where clause. But in this case, you would be talking to the city table rather than the country table, as I did in the two-step relation retrieval. So that's the consideration to keep in mind, that there are two different ways to get the data. In addition to that, there is sometimes it is necessary to retrieve related data right in the first shot. Like for instance, you go to the countries, you get a list of the countries, and then for every country you want to get related cities. That is definitely possible, but keep in mind that the result is going to be limited to 100 related objects. We cannot return all of them because this could impact the performance of the application and from the server-side perspective, and it could become overwhelming for the client side because you're just providing so much data where the client side will start going through all the data and impacting negatively the user experience of the client. However, the actual mechanism is quite straightforward, and I think I have mentioned it or demonstrated this in some of the videos in this course. And this is how it works. So for instance, if we go to country in the relations, click relations, and you will get this drop down. You can select the actual relation that you want to retrieve, and when you click get, along with every single country that we got, right here, this is Afghanistan, you also have a collection of cities that you retrieved, okay? And then this collection of cities is going to be limited to first, I believe, 100. Actually, it says right here 10. Let me check if 100 is even possible. Yes, so I think it returns the first 100 relations. So you cannot go to more than that. So for instance, if we do 200 right here, yes, so the related relations page size is the maximum value is 100. Notice that in the actual URL, the way it looks now is we say load relations, and we specify the relation column, and we identify the page size for how many related objects you want to return. With this request, you get a page of data for the countries table, and then for every single country, you have another collection it is a JSON array, but if you're using codeless, it's going to be a list available through the property cities of that related data. And then if you need more, then you know that there are two mechanisms to retrieve more. The one that I demonstrated first in the UI, and the second using the where clause. And with this, you can start getting additional data. That's the core mechanism of retrieving relations. Now you know about multiple ways to do this. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy coding.